Okay, so I'll just let people continue to roll in, but let's get started. Thank you for coming to the last session of day one for the Envisioning Career Futures virtual conference. I'm happy to introduce to you Dr. Kelly Ann Brown, who is the Associate Director at UCHRI. She oversees the UC-wide Competitive Grants Program, Humanists at Work, and Horizons of the Humanities, among others. Her professional background includes more than 20 years of experience in public policy and administration at the city, county, and state levels of California government. While recent scholarship addresses issues of professionalization, the work of the humanities, and the future of graduate education, she finds herself thinking more and more about alumni engagement and the need to look far outside the academy for many things. So today she is going to talk to us about Stories from the Field, which is a UC-wide project that details the narratives and numbers that give voice to some of the conditions and futures facing today's UC Humanities PhDs. And this was a late but very happy addition, and I'm so glad that Dr. Brown is able to join us today. So go ahead.
Please call me Kelly, and thank you, Sujin, for the introduction.
Sure.
So my name is Kelly, and I am Associate Director of the UC Humanities Research Institute. I received my PhD in literature from UC Santa Cruz in 2011. And before I start talking, I just thought I would give you a sense of my plan for the next 30 minutes. I would like to talk about the booklet, both as an object, but also the background for maybe 15 minutes, and then leave the final 15 minutes for questions or conversation. So that was the style of how we ran Humanists at Work, which I'll tell you a little bit about, but it's also something that I find to be very productive. So I'll talk for 15 minutes, and then I really do hope that you all have questions or concerns or things you want to talk about. So for those who don't know UCHRI, we are the system-wide Humanities Research Institute. So we work across all 10 campuses of the UC system. And we do a couple of different things. One of the things that we do is we provide research funding for faculty and graduate students to pursue research in the humanities and humanistic social sciences. We are a part of the UC Humanities Network, which, as I understand it, is the funder for today's event. So there's this whole side of UCHRI that does grant making, and then there's another side of UCHRI that does research initiatives. I direct the research initiative part as well. And we've funded system-wide initiatives on humanities and changing conceptions of work, on religions and diaspora. And we also have run for the last maybe 8 years, Humanists at Work. And that's probably most topical for the conversation today. And HumWork, there's a lot I can say about it, but most of you are new faces to me, so I think you may not know anything really about Humanists at Work. It was an initiative we began in 2013-14, and it comprised a lot of different activities. Probably the most popular were these twice a year workshops / conferences that we would hold around the state. So we're system-wide, so we need to move all across the state, and we would hold these workshops in places where humanists could ostensibly imagine themselves working. So in museums and cultural centers and libraries. And we would fly graduate students in from around the system to participate in day-long workshops. And the workshops were fairly innovative. We tried to push at the boundaries of what workshops could be. To give you an example, one of the workshops that we held in Silicon Valley in San Jose, which was in collaboration with our partners at UC Santa Cruz, we would always begin our workshops with a session called Stories from the Field. And that was an opportunity for UC Humanities PhD alumni to come and talk about their experiences. But then the rest of the day could involve, a session on info interviewing with Annie Maxfield. At that workshop, we held a session on debt and the humanities, where we used it as a space to think about issues that you don't typically talk about in professionalization circles, like debt, how debt informs one's post-PhD career trajectories, but also debt more broadly understood, like collective debt, debts to society, what do we even mean? So we really, in these workshops, tried to push at the genre and also what we meant by the word professionalization. And evaluation, thank you, Amanda, for putting that in the chat. Evaluation was always really important to us. So we had a paid advisory committee of grad students who would run the workshops with me, and we would evaluate them. And each time we would try to do something new. So we attempted to be as creative as we could. One of the things I'll say is that what I quickly learned in these workshops was that it was as much how we did it as what we did. And so making space for uncomfortable conversations, making space for awkwardness in many different ways, that was something that turned out to be very important. And what resulted was a very strong community of grad students and alumni and faculty and others, but primarily grad students and alumni who continue to be in conversation with one another today. And maybe the last thing I'll say about those workshops is what we realized after the first one was that there was a need to focus on networking, demystifying it, doing it in our own way. And so our own way ended up being we would bring PhD alumni in the night before, and we would put the alumni into a room with one another with drinks, and they would have drinks and talk. And while they were drinking and talking, the grad students would be in a room learning how to do networking. And then the grad students would come out and we would essentially have these sort of like wedding dinners on steroids where the invited PhD alumni would move from table to table, and at each table were the grad students mixed according to campus so that you got to meet people from around the system, mixed according to discipline, but that we set in that way so that they could identify which alumni do they want to talk to. So over the course of 4 courses, which I will admit, it would include a cocktail course, we had an opportunity to talk to alumni and for alumni to talk with grad students. So, I mean, you can tell like it was really about community building. And that's what I learned is that the community building for grad students has been essential, but also for alumni. So I'll stop there. We did a lot of things with Humanists at Work. We've built a LinkedIn group. So if you're not a part of that and you would like to be, we have about 600 members. Reach out to me. I'd be happy to include you. And then the funding ended. And we had held about 8 workshops. And we had a good group of people who had gone off into the world and they're doing really really interesting things in a variety of ways. And we entered, we being Humanists at Work, entered into a quiet research phase. And that's where we began working on this survey data. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, the UC system applied to the Council of Graduate Schools, CGS, for a career pathways grant. And there were many grantees across the nation. UC was, of course, the largest. We're the largest university system. But when the UC system was contemplating its application, I went to them and said, if we're going to do this quantitative data collection of humanities PhDs, there should be a qualitative component as well. And so here's what I proposed. And we proposed a series of focus groups. The UC system was funded. We were the only ones to do the focus groups. So we have something special like UC. I think we can be proud of that. And then I was approached with some money to analyze the results, not just of the focus groups, which of course I would have done anyways, but to analyze the quantitative data collection. And I'm a literature person, but I quickly got into analyzing like a significant amount of data, of course, in collaboration with our colleagues at UCOP, who led the data collection process, who created these amazing dashboards that I would highly encourage everybody to check out. So we created this booklet, and there's an online booklet, but there's an actual printed booklet. And, homework, when we held the workshops, material things matter. Putting students up in nice hotels, feeding them good food, having high quality printed materials, I just think they matter. And I think they help you kind of get into a different mindset. And so we hope the same thing will happen with this booklet, which is that we will be distributing electronic copies, but I have lots of hard copies as well. And I hope that once we start getting together, the hard copies will be able to circulate in more interesting ways. If you haven't had a chance to look at the data booklet, that's okay. I will give you a few reasons why you should look at it. It's a quick read. It's, maybe 20 minutes. I think it's interesting to look at. We like to push at genres. And so I was curious about how could we create a data booklet in a genre that doesn't scream, university administration data booklet. And so we were trying to do something interesting with that. So we managed to avoid using almost entirely stock photographs. We used one stock photograph. We tried to create different narratives through. I think we are very honest in the booklet about the limitations of our analysis. We're critical of data collection, and I think that comes through in the booklet as well. We're interested in what a humanistic methodology around collecting and analyzing data would look like. And we begin to do that in the booklet. I think the other reason I would encourage you to look at the booklet, I mean, there are real ethical reasons as to why you should look at the booklet because of what it says about post-PhD career trajectories, but many of the voices who contributed to the booklet come from outside of the university. So it's not, a bunch of administrators, that's who I am, but it's not a bunch of administrators sitting around talking about what they think it should be or what they imagine it to be. This is based upon our interactions with alumni who are at work in the world doing a variety of interesting things. So I think that's a reason, those are some reasons to look at the booklet. So maybe just for the next 5 minutes or so, I'll walk you through a few of, I call them lowlights because the news isn't great. Like the data isn't incredibly encouraging, though I think there are some important areas where there are things to be proud of. But we break the data booklet into different components. And so one of the components is economic outcomes. And so, for example, if you're looking at the booklet right now, on page 4, we look at economic outcomes in terms of earnings, and we compare the earnings for humanities PhDs versus all of their peers, right? And that's an unfair separation. I will acknowledge that, but we are trying to do some kind of comparative analysis. And if you just want to look at the most recent graduates that we have from UCOP's dashboard, if you look at those earners who are earning less than $50,000 a year post-PhD, for the humanities, that represents 27% of all humanities PhDs who graduated in 2014. 27% of them are making under $50,000. But when you compare that to their peers, it's 12%, right? And those numbers actually get worse for the graduates in 2013, right? So we look also at the percentage of humanities PhDs not employed, and unemployment is more than double for humanities PhDs. But one of the parts of the story that we thought was also important to tell was the number of PhDs with a second job, which is in many cases a marker of underemployment, which actually opens up the whole question around adjuncting. And if you look at, I'm just going to look at one data point. If you look at 2014, more than two times the number of humanities PhDs have multiple jobs versus their peers, right? So 13% of PhDs who graduated in 2014 who responded to the survey have more than one job, right? In the booklet, we talk a lot about the focus groups, and that's my kind of personal contribution to the data. And I would love to talk about that, those interactions if you all have questions. What I will say is that in the booklet, we took all that we heard and we created we created 6 thematics that speak to the majority of the conversations. And they range from what it was like to leave the academy to issues around, the kinds of expectations that graduate students, the PhDs found themselves in as grad students. One of the other major sections is on professional preparation, and I think this is probably appropriate for why you all are here today. And the survey asked some really interesting questions around how important certain attributes and skills are in performing their primary job, whatever their primary job is post-PhD. And across the board, humanities don't rank as highly as the others, which is curious. It makes me ask questions about what they're doing. But one of the really sad, interesting stories is on page, for those who are following along, 25. There was a question about how well did your graduate program prepare you in the following knowledge, attributes, and behaviors? And almost across the board, with one exception, humanities PhDs are very critical of how well they were trained, even in things like critical analysis and evaluation, applying research methods, developing new ideas, processes. It prompted a lot of questions for us in terms of, are humanities PhDs just more critical of themselves? I mean, I think maybe, but I think it should ask us or force us to ask some institutional questions too. What else can I say? I mean, I think the other thing that I would highlight that's special about the booklet is we have a section on emerging practices, because we interacted with the data in a variety of ways. And we interacted with not just the data that UCOP collected, but data that Humanists at Work, we've been collecting for years. It put us in a position to be able to identify some things that we might want to experiment with moving forward. And I mean, people with the heft to make these changes, whether it's in their department or across the university. I think I'll end by just maybe saying 1 minute or so about what our next steps are. We have not yet shared this publicly with people. We're right now updating the Humanists at Work website. I mean, it's been a rough 18 months, and so we are just happy to have the booklet done. We need to update the website. We plan to have that done by the end of the month, and we will be sending the email version of Stories from the Field out to everyone starting in October. So all deans of humanities, graduate deans, department chairs, department coordinators, faculty who have written, grad students who I know about, humanities centers, all of the people that we can think of. But we're open to whom else we should send this to. And also we want to send these printed booklets out as well. So we're going to figure that out. When we update the website, we're launching 2 new series that we're excited to share. And one of them is called Alumni at Work. And it's doing what I think the campuses need to do, which is featuring their alumni who are not doing tenure track positions, who are doing other types of work, so that there are models. And we're trying to set up the series in a way so that it's a bit, I don't know, it makes space for irony or to be irreverent. I sometimes feel like professionalization conversations are so serious. And so I find that alienating. And so this is like the Alumni at Work is going to be an opportunity for alumni to poke fun, because they're in the position where they can. But we're asking them to do things like actually identify their salary, identify what position they have now, what their previous position was, did they negotiate for salary? And then they answer questions like what advice you would give to your pre-PhD self. And then some usual questions like what's the greatest skill you learned in grad school? You know what I mean? Those kinds of things. So we're trying to do it in a way that's like maybe just a bit not so expected. And then the last thing I'll say is that we're starting a podcast series. So the grad student who's a GSR at UCHRI, she's collaborating with a grad student at the University of Florida to create a podcast called Under Review. And they just want to talk about professionalization in a different way. So I'll end there and just say that I hope that you, find it interesting. I'm open to any and all conversation, and hopefully you get the sense that like there's really nothing that's not on the table for me to talk about. So I will mute myself.
Thanks so much, Kelly. This is just a time for questions, if you have any. Actually, if you could just share a little bit more about the distribution. So should they get on an email list, or how do you want to handle that? Or if you could talk a little bit to that.
So for those of you who are in the room, you should contact me directly, which is, I'll put it into the chat, my email address. However, moving forward, it's going to be homework@hri.uci.edu. But for those of you in the room, contact me personally. I would appreciate that.
Okay, great. Thanks. Judith, go ahead.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much for the presentation and for putting the session together. I had a question relating this kind of like last topic that you were touching upon, and is that a lot of times our PIs, our mentors, whatever we want to call them, they seem disconnected from what are the opportunities moving forward for PhD students, PhD candidates in going into the job market. And I was wondering if with all this data, that is fantastic data that you put together, if there's any plan to maybe in the future create workshops or stuff directed precisely to faculty, so they can be more informed in terms of like what are the trends, what is really like hot in the field right now, and that kind of like thing.
Yeah. So what I'm hoping to do is to find people like you all who might want to bring the booklet to faculty, whether it just mysteriously arrives in their box or you deliver it. And one of the things that I'm going to do is include cover letters that say that if people would like to have a sort of moderated conversation, I'd be happy to attend. Right. So I'm actually happy to put myself out there for various departments or institutions who want to do this. But it's also something that grad students could do. And so what an idea that I just had as you were talking is, you know, wouldn't it be nice if we could find some funding to support grad students who could be supported by me, by others, to like host these conversations? Though that might be too scary. I actually think it could ideally be done by a grad student faculty combination, because, you know, it's like some of this is like truths you might not want to really sit with. There is some talk about holding like system-wide conversations around this. To be fully like honest, I just need to find money to do that. But my experience in doing homework is that when individual graduate students brought whatever it is to their departments and said, we need to have a conversation about it, that's when the conversation really took off. Like, you know, and I feel like there's so many grad students, and grad students do such like critical labor for the running of the university, that there's like a mass there in a very like major way. So if you have thoughts, I'm open to it. I think what I'm going to do is send out that cover letter that said, contact me, happy to weigh in. But I think maybe we need to do a more coordinated thing where we support grad students and faculty to co-present this or host a conversation about it. I mean, I think humanities centers tend to be safe spaces for this. I think that, you know, that would be a great place to begin, but hopefully they move into the department. And to the people in the chat, so somebody asks about emailing the PDF to your director of doctoral studies. Yeah, go for it. I just like really want to get the website up and running, but if there's enthusiasm for it, I won't say no. The other thing that I'm happy to do is, as people know of contacts that they would like to receive the booklet, send them to me, you know, and I think that if that word can get out.
Thanks. Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for your work and for your presentation. I guess maybe following up on Judith's question, I just wanted to ask your thoughts on like what do you feel are reasonable expectations for graduate students to have in terms of, you know, support from faculty advisors in the career exploratory phase? It's something I've been asking and I feel like I've struggled with. Like, am I expecting the wrong thing or too much, or am I going to the wrong place? I'm not sure.
I mean, this is being recorded, but I'll say it because I think it needs to be said. In my experience across the system, I've been disheartened to hear about the lack of support grad students get for their scholarly work, right? Like even just starting there. I think that, you know, I'm always surprised that like hearing from grad students who have a hard time getting their committees to read their dissertations or whatever it is, you know, and I think that's like that. I went to grad school to do that scholarly work. I didn't go to grad school to have my advisor help me learn how to do project management, though a creative mentor would be able to do that. So I guess my response is a sort of very practical one, which is that I think that if you're early in your career, you might look at who you decide to work with in a particular way, which you might decide having people on my committee who are hip to this is important to me, or having one or two people on my committee who are hip to this is important to me. So I'm going to look for people who do that. But I'm pragmatic. I think that departments should be open to this. I should think they should be having these conversations. I think they should be asking themselves very hard, you know, ethical questions about how they feel about inviting in large cohorts that they can't support while they're in grad school, you know, or barely. And then what happens when they leave? So I think those are the questions. But I think for you as an individual, I would say, I'm always careful about saying you should expect this, you should expect this. I mean, I think that you got to decide what's important to you and what you need from your mentors. I think what I will say is that the university is a very big place. And I don't know what campus you're at, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I went to Santa Cruz, and it's not the biggest of the UCs. And there were people all around who I could have gone to get this kind of support, and they're not faculty. And I'm not letting faculty off the hook by saying that. I just think people have different forms of expertise. And so you'd be surprised about who's working in weird sectors of the university who would be able to provide that kind of mentorship to you. And I know, it's common now to talk about having multiple mentors. And I think that's very important. Because that way you can really decide based upon somebody's interests and expertise how you can rely upon them. It does not change the fact, though, that when you're a PhD candidate, and what I heard from the alumni, so this isn't my opinion, this is just what I heard from the alumni, it was a big game people were playing. They were saying to their advisors, yes, I want to be a tenure track faculty member. Yes, this is what I want to do. But they were doing everything in their power in their other times to prepare for other jobs and pursue other positions. So I just that's what I would acknowledge. So it's not an answer, but I think I would just be very realistic and know that there are other people on campus who can support you. The question is, how do you get to them and how do you know who they are? And I think there are those of us, I'm looking at us in the call, Amanda, Nicoletta, myself, who are, have a sense of the university and different pockets that you could go to.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a wonderful answer. I think all of the insights you just shared are so critical.
I think we have time for one more question, if there is one, or a comment.
Jeez, this chat,
Mhm.
Thank you for sharing that, Juliet. I mean, these are the really dirty conversations that need to be had. And you can't talk about professionalization unless you're going to talk about that.
Right.
But of course, I mean, I will say, this isn't the hook I would use to get faculty in the room. Oh, thank you guys. I appreciate this has been, I mean, I'm open to another question, but I will say this has been so much work. So it's really nice to get this nice feedback. That said, it's not perfect and it has a ways to go.
Well, it's a way of, starting these, making these conversations more transparent, more legible. And I think that I appreciate your transparency and honesty in sharing about the experiences of the students and working on this. I think it's really important to sort of pull back the curtain so that students know how to be supported and what they're sort of going towards.
I saw that Nicoletta, you don't want to ask your question?
Well,
Nicoletta has been a huge support. So thank you, Nicoletta.
Sure. I'm sorry, there might be some baby related noise, so I'll try to be very quick. I agree with all the comments of support and frankly, being wildly impressed with this data. I think everybody here, if you can take the time to read through the booklet carefully, please do so. The raw data is also available on the Office of the President's website. If you have the inclination to play around with it. One thing that strikes me about it, particularly given the experiences we've all collectively passed through in the last 18-24 months, is that this is an extraordinarily powerful center of a conversation, of really an ongoing conversation that I think what I'd be really interested in hearing from everyone here, how this is going to be picked up, is now being picked up and will be picked up in the future by students, by thoughtful faculty and lecturers who have really been fighting for a long time for institutional change and transformation. and how those conversations, this data in particular, is informing and possibly transforming the conversations around graduate professionalization. From my standpoint, it's relatively narrow, the work that I do, but I think there's a lot more that can be done to improve climate for graduate students, just in feeling supported. Some of the comments that I'm reading here are frankly shocking, but not surprising. And I think that the booklet and the research that it represents is extraordinarily powerful and is going to be driving some really important discussions in the future. And I would love to keep in touch with everybody who's part of those.
Thank you so much, Nicoletta.
Maybe something I'll throw out there is that maybe one thing that UCHRI could do is to support a working group around the booklet to address that question that you just raised, Nicoletta, for people who would be interested. So whether, it's thinking about Judith, who how do we foster these conversations? That's something that we could do, and we could, that doesn't need to be in person either. So that's an interesting idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's the hope. I mean, this is speaking both to the conference and also to this particular work. I really hope that we can generate many different kinds of conversations. This is the benefit of having a virtual retreat, that we can do this kind of connecting. And so we're hoping that we can really do that. That will be a concrete outcome from this virtual retreat. It is 12:03, so I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I want to thank Kelly again for presenting this work, for being here, and to all of you for being here. I hope it's been a worthwhile use of your time. I'm looking forward to tomorrow with Derek Addig, and also myself and Sam Carter will be also talking about how to model an informational interview. And Derek will be talking more about how to sort of think about your skills and your values in a way that kind of with a sense of coherence. And he's wonderful. So, or they are wonderful, I should say. So I would really highly recommend you to come to that. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you all for attending.